Picture the scene. A man who has never seen anything in his life. He doesn't know what color looks like. He doesn't know what a face looks like. He doesn't know what light looks like. And then someone crouches down, scoops dust from the ground, mixes it with saliva, and presses that mud against his eyes. No ceremony, no grand words, no fanfare, just mud. That was Jesus, the Son of God. And the question most people have never stopped to ask is a simple one. Why did he need mud to perform a miracle? The scene takes place in Jerusalem, most likely near the temple courts, where beggars would position themselves to receive alms from worshippers coming to pray. The sun beat down hard on those stone pavements. The smell of incense drifted from inside. And there, seated in his usual spot, was a man who had never seen any of it. He was born blind. This wasn't a vision that had faded over time. It wasn't the result of an accident or an illness he had developed later in life. It was congenital, total. From his very first moment of existence, that man had lived in complete darkness. In the ancient world, that carried a weight we can barely imagine today. Jewish culture in the first century generally held that physical illness and disability were consequences of sin, either the individual's own sin or that of their parents. It was a deeply rooted religious belief that turned physical suffering into public shame. The blind man wasn't simply a person with a sensory limitation. In the eyes of his society, he was someone marked, someone who carried in his body the evidence of a spiritual failure. And that is precisely why the disciples asked the question they ask in John chapter 9, verse 2. Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? That was the logic of the world Jesus lived in. Suffering had to have a guilty party. Disability had to have a moral explanation. And the simplest, most socially acceptable explanation was, someone sinned, and this is the price. Jesus rejects that logic entirely. His response, recorded in John chapter 9, verse 3, is direct and unsettling. Neither this man nor his parents sinned. He was born blind so that the works of God might be displayed in him. That answer changed everything. There was no guilty party. There was no punishment. There was a purpose, and that purpose was about to be revealed in front of everyone. But before we can understand what Jesus did, we need to understand where he was and what was at stake. Jerusalem in the first century was a city of deep tensions. The Pharisees controlled the religious interpretation of the people. They defined what was permitted and what was forbidden, what was sacred and what was profane. And one of the most rigidly enforced rules in the Pharisaic system involved the Sabbath, the weekly day of rest, from sundown on Friday to sundown on Saturday. On the Sabbath, no work was permitted. And what counted as work? Over the centuries, scribes and Pharisees had developed an extensive list of prohibited activities. Kneading was one of them. Mixing ingredients to form a paste was considered labor. Making medicine was also forbidden. And there was a specific discussion in the Talmud, the body of rabbinic writings that regulated Jewish life, about applying saliva to the eyes as a medicinal practice, particularly fasting saliva in the morning, which was regarded as therapeutic in the folk medicine of the era. The Jewish historian Flavius Josephus, who lived in the 1st century after Christ, documented in his writings that popular medicine throughout Palestine made extensive use of natural substances to treat eye conditions, including herbs, minerals, and in some cases, bodily fluids. In other words, what Jesus was about to do was not merely a miracle. It was an act loaded with cultural, religious, and political meaning. Every gesture carried a layer, and the choice to use saliva and mud was not accidental. But why mud? Why saliva? Why not simply a word, as in so many other miracles? That is the question that runs through this entire video. And the answer begins long before Jerusalem. It begins at the very beginning of everything. To understand why Jesus used mud, we have to go back to the beginning of human history. In Genesis chapter 2, verse 7, it is written that God formed man from the dust of the ground. The Hebrew word used is afar, dust, powder, earth, and the act of shaping, of creating form from matter, is described with the verb yatsar, the same verb used for a potter working clay. God made man from mud. This is not a secondary metaphor. In Hebrew thought, it was the foundational story of human existence. Human beings were taken from the earth. They were shaped by the hands of God from clay. Now bring that back to those stone courts in Jerusalem. Jesus bends down. He spits on the ground. He mixes saliva with dust. And with his hands, he forms a paste, mud. Several biblical scholars and theologians, including commentator William Barclay, point directly to this connection. By using mud to heal a man who was born without the ability to see, Jesus was recreating. He was repeating, in a very deliberate way, the gesture of the Creator who formed man from the dust of the earth. The mud on the blind man's eyes was not merely a physical medium. It was a profound theological symbol. It was the Creator returning to the act of creation. The man who was blind from birth had a defect that had existed since he was formed. And Jesus, shaping the mud with his own hands, was completing what had been left incomplete. But there are other layers. Saliva in the ancient world was not seen the way we see it today. In Greco-Roman and Jewish medicine of the 1st century, saliva, particularly fasting saliva, collected in the early morning, was considered medicinal. The Roman writer Pliny the Elder, who lived between 23 and 79 after Christ, described in his works on natural history the use of human saliva as a remedy for various conditions, including eye problems. In the culture of the ancient world, the saliva of a person in authority carried particular power. The saliva of a king, a prophet, a healer was regarded with reverence. This means Jesus was using a language his audience already understood. He was speaking in their cultural vocabulary, but he was taking that vocabulary to an entirely different level. There is yet another dimension. The Gospel of John was written with a very specific theology. John opens with the same words as the book of Genesis. In the beginning was the Word. The intention is unmistakable. Jesus is the Creator, and throughout the Gospel of John, the miracles of Jesus are not called miracles, they are called signs. Signs that point to who he is. The healing of the man born blind, recorded in John chapter 9, is not simply a healing, it is a sign. And that sign communicates something very specific. Jesus has power over creation because he is the Creator. The mud is the Creator's signature. But the miracle is not finished yet. After placing the mud on the blind man's eyes, Jesus does not simply say, "You are healed." He gives an instruction, "Go, wash in the pool of Siloam." This is recorded in John chapter 9, verse 7. Why does Jesus send the man to Siloam? The pool of Siloam was one of the most well-known reservoirs in Jerusalem. It received the waters from Hezekiah's tunnel, built in the 8th century before Christ to protect the city during an Assyrian siege. Archaeological excavations carried out by the Israel Antiquities Authority and confirmed by the Biblical Archaeology Society uncovered the original pool of Siloam in 2004, revealing a monumental stone structure with steps descending to the water. That pool was used for ritual purification. Jewish pilgrims arriving in Jerusalem for the festivals would pass through the pool of Siloam before entering the temple. It was an immersion of purity. Jesus sends the blind man to wash there specifically, not in any pool, not in any water, in the one that Jews directly associated with the entrance into the sacred, and the name Siloam itself carries a meaning the text of John makes a point of noting. Sent. The pool of Siloam means the one who is sent. And Jesus, throughout the Gospel of John, presents himself as the one sent by the Father. The instruction to go wash in the pool of the sent one was itself a sign. The man goes, he washes, and he comes back, seeing. And it is at that exact moment that the full weight of what just happened begins to fall on everyone around him. What happened when he opened his eyes will surprise you. Stay right here. He came back, and the world he had never seen was there, for the first time. The text of John, chapter 9, verse 7 simply says, "So he went and washed, and came back seeing." There is no dramatic description, no shouting, no immediate celebration. John records the moment with a brevity that, in its own way, is even more powerful. The miracle happened. The man went, the man washed, the man came back seeing. But what follows is where the story truly explodes. His neighbors, the people who had known that man as the blind beggar who sat in the same spot every day, fell into total confusion. Some said, "That's him." Others said, "No, it just looks like him." And the man had to keep repeating, "It's me. It really is me." The confusion was understandable. An entire identity had been erased. He was no longer the blind man. He was now a man who could see, and that created an enormous problem for the religious system around him. The Pharisees were summoned. And here begins one of the most dramatic scenes in the entire Gospel of John. The Pharisees interrogated the man. They interrogated his parents. They came back to the man again. And they tried, in every way possible, to find an explanation that didn't require Jesus. Why? Because the miracle had happened on the Sabbath. And in the Pharisaic logic, a man who violated the Sabbath could not come from God. A man who made mud on the Sabbath, because kneading was considered prohibited work, was breaking the law. Therefore, he could not be the Messiah. He could not have been sent by God. But that logic had a problem that could not be resolved. The miracle was right there. The man's eyes were open. The congenital blindness was gone. And the Pharisees themselves admit in John chapter 9, verse 16, "Never since the world began has it been heard that anyone opened the eyes of a man born blind." Never. In the entire history of Judaism, in all the accounts of all the prophets, there was no precedent for healing congenital blindness. Not Moses, not Elijah, not Elisha. None of them had done this. And now it was done. Jesus' choice to use mud had yet another dimension the Pharisees could not ignore. Applying mud to someone else's eyes was explicitly cited in rabbinic discussions as a form of medicine that was prohibited on the Sabbath. Jesus did not merely heal. Jesus chose the method that most directly confronted the rules the Pharisees used to control the people. It was a sign within a sign. The theologian and biblical scholar Andreas Köstenberger, in his extensive work on the Gospel of John, points out that the miracles of Jesus in John are not performed in spite of circumstances. They are performed through them. Jesus chooses the Sabbath, chooses the method, chooses the pool, chooses the man born blind. Every element is part of the message. And the message is, I am the Lord of the Sabbath. I am the Creator. I am the sent one. The blind man himself reaches that conclusion before the Pharisees do. Under pressure, under interrogation, under the threat of being expelled from the synagogue, he does not back down. He grows. In John chapter 9, verse 25, he says those words that have echoed through history. "Whether he is a sinner, I do not know. One thing I do know, I was blind, and now I see." It is one of the simplest and most powerful confessions in the entire Bible. A man with no formal education, no theological training, no sophisticated argument, summed up the miracle in one sentence that no Pharisee could refute. "I was blind. Now I see." And when Jesus came back to find the man, after he had been thrown out of the synagogue, the final scene of the account took place. Jesus revealed himself directly to him. He asked, "Do you believe in the Son of God?" And when the man asked who that was, so that he could believe, Jesus said, "You are looking at him right now." And the man bowed down before him. The entire narrative had reached its destination. Not only were the man's physical eyes opened, his spiritual eyes were opened as well. He left that situation seeing in two completely different ways. And the Pharisees, who could see perfectly well with their physical eyes, showed themselves to be completely blind to what was happening right in front of them. Jesus used mud for many reasons at once. Because it was the language of creation. Because it was the symbol of the Creator returning to the act of forming man. Because it spoke in the cultural vocabulary of a people who understood folk medicine. Because it directly confronted the legalistic interpretation of the Sabbath. Because the gesture itself was a sign pointing to the identity of the one performing it. But perhaps the deepest layer of all is this. Jesus didn't need mud to heal. He chose the mud. And every deliberate choice God makes carries a meaning that goes far beyond what the eye can see on the surface. Sometimes God uses what seems too simple. A bit of mud, a single word, an impossible moment. And it is precisely in the apparent simplicity of the gesture that the depth of the meaning is hidden. The man born blind did not just receive sight. He received a story. A story that has traveled 2,000 years and still reaches us today. A story that says, what seems broken, what seems incomplete from the very beginning, is already in the Creator's eyes, waiting for the right moment to be made whole. What are you waiting for God to do in a more expected, more convenient way? Write it in the comments. I want to know what this story stirred in you. If this kind of content makes you see the Bible differently, subscribe to the channel. There's a lot more to come.